boom, just that big blue go live in the corner there. Bam. All right, live on Facebook. I think we're live on YouTube as well. Let's go live on the radio, shall we?
Let's go live on the radio.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Happy Wednesday, and welcome back to the Armchair Analysts. I am your first chair, Tim, along with second chair, Zach.
Heck yeah.
And today, well, you know, I put it out in the post on Facebook, spoiler warning, neither one of us watched the Pro Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
No, I didn't.
You talked about how you were going to watch it.
Yeah, I was excited about it for a minute, and then I decided I didn't care anymore.
Sure.
So didn't end up watching the Pro Bowl. I hear some, you know, it was kind of fun. It was kind of whatever. Peyton Manning was upset at the end of it because I think
I did see that clip. I did watch that clip.
Yeah, he's a competitive guy. Doesn't matter, especially to Eli. I don't know. It doesn't matter. That's not what we're here to talk about today. The Pro Bowl. What I don't even know why we still do it.
I think who was it? Myles Garrett. Somebody got a little hurt.
Yeah, which is just like I think he got turf toe or something. It's like, well, why do we even have the Pro Bowl? We should just get rid of it.
Yeah,
we should just get rid of it. But all those guys who are still under contract until the Super Bowl's over need something to do, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, the NFL needs to fill that gap.
Mm-hmm.
They need to fill that bye week between the Super Bowl and the conference championship game. So yeah, it makes sense, you know, and to put the Pro Bowl there or whatever. Like they just have to be creative, you know, with it. And it'd be cool to see if there was some type of like stakes involved, right? Because isn't it like for Major League Baseball, isn't like their Pro Bowl or whatever that
the All-Star game,
you know, that has ramifications for who's gonna have home field advantage during the. And I think the NBA did something similar. So if there was some skin in the game or whatever, I can see it.
You know, the two teams that are obviously competing in the Super Bowl aren't going to participate, right? Because if they get hurt, then they're screwed. Right. But if the AFC wins, then the AFC team is the home team.
For the next season or whatever. Yeah, I got something like that. Put something in there. But we're not going to get a lot out of it.
Make it worth. I mean, you know, and it's I don't know. I think it's better that it's flag football and they have all the skills competitions again. Like that furthers a lot of storylines that the NFL has really been wanting to push, like the Derek Carr winning the accuracy, and then I don't know, whoever else won anything else, you know. But like the one I saw was Derek Carr won the accuracy throwing contest, and turned around at all the coaches and said, "See, I still got it." Like, yeah, without any pressure and no lineman in your face, and also with a net. So maybe you do, maybe you don't. We'll find out later. So yeah, but unfortunately, we're not here. Well, I guess fortunately, we're not here to talk about the Pro Bowl.
Yeah, there's not much to talk about.
No, I think we covered it. Show's over. Hey, well, all right, we'll see you next week. 3 minutes in, new record. No, so this week we decided. Well, Zach decided. He brought it up. It was really his idea. Not that it's a bad idea, but it's something we've brought up before in a lot of our talks about the game, the NFL. And something that fans know what it is in name mostly.
Sure.
Like there's definitely people out there who know the ins and outs. But guys like me, I've always ever heard of it, and it's this magical looming thing. Of course, I'm talking about the salary cap, the NFL salary cap. They come out with it every year around this time. Like it just came out a month ago.
It was about a week and a half ago.
It feels so much longer.
But there's, you know, and it all depends on when, you know, that information gets processed and stuff like that. So, and everybody, there's always hints around it. So you knew kind of where it was going to be out. And most of the time, and not every time, but most years, the salary cap is actually projected to be higher than what most analysts say.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
The negotiations because a lot of this, and I'll go into it, but a lot of the negotiations with the revenues are kept private, right? You don't have to, you know, tell what you're, you know, what kind of contracts you're signing and stuff like that with certain vendors. So, you know, we're just left, you know, analysts online are just left to guess. And, you know, it seems to be pretty spot on, pretty close every year.
Yeah. Those people much smarter than us can figure it out. I mean, just like the first thing, just going right off of it is like definition wise, like by definition, what is the salary cap? Do you have a definition? Because I do right here. If you don't.
Yeah, so I know how it's figured.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, if you were to ask me what is a salary cap, or what is the salary cap in the NFL? It's a hard cap, which is figured, which is that it's a total revenue minus expected costs, which include player benefits, divided by 30 teams. So there's a pot of money that's divided equally among 32 teams. That is the limit to what NFL teams are allowed to spend.
Yep, it's an agreement between the NFL and the players, placing a limit on the amount of money the team can spend on player contracts, including base salary bonuses such as roster bonuses, workout bonuses, operations, signings, and anything. Hey, catch 100 touchdowns this year. I can't promise you another million because that would take us over the cap.
Right.
It would have to be a reasonable amount. And exactly like you said, calculated by dividing the percentage of revenues determined by NFL CBA, which is the collective bargaining agreement between all the teams.
Which happens in 10 years.
Yep, every 10 years. They just recently did another one, didn't they?
Well, 2020. Yep.
Yeah, about 3 years ago.
Yep.
It was a big one, too. I mean, that was a big deal because 2020 was a weird year. Like, coming out of that one, I mean, we're still in it, right? But,
yeah.
When they agreed on that CBA, I don't think COVID was a thing yet, but now seeing what COVID, how it affected, it definitely affected the salary cap that year.
Yeah, for 1 year it did. It most definitely did.
Yeah, and then divided by 32, 32 teams in the NFL. Great. Real quick, when I was reading through this stuff, I'm like, well, what is? I knew collective bargaining agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get to that? Without diving too deep in the weeds, it's just a labor agreement which reflects the results of collective bargaining negotiations between the NFL Players Association and the NFL itself. So they're like, how much, I buy your jersey, how much of that money are you going to see? Yeah, and that's agreed upon from the PA and the NFL.
The CBA is something to figure it out, or something to think about. It's essentially boils down to owners versus players, right? Yeah. 32 owners, and however many people are, just players in the NFL, not coaches, because coaches, they fall under management, which ultimately falls under ownership. So it is literally the workers versus the bosses, which makes it a really, really interesting case study. Mm-hmm. And I'm not an expert by any means on the salary cap, but what I find it incredibly fascinating because the NFL, the fascination of it, derives from you're seeing what essentially is a controlled economy, right? Mm-hmm. So when I say a controlled economy, where you are limited to a certain amount of capital, a certain amount of cash in there, so how that is constructed is such a phenomenal, is such a cool case study that I don't think a lot of people really appreciate, and people don't appreciate it because there are a lot of terms and there's a lot of things in there that make people. Why would I care about this? So
it's a lot of legalese. It's a lot of fine print. I mean, it's
and there is definitely a lot of that, and there's a lot of confidential. So we will never see a full contract, nor would we probably most laymen be able to even properly read it or understand the contents of that. I mean, an NFL contract is thick and it is derived by a lot of lawyers. So when you see, when you hear about, and we've seen instances in the NFL before, most notably with, I think Ricky Williams is probably a big one. And we're kind of seeing this with Lamar Jackson. But, when these players go and they negotiate contracts for themselves, they're really doing themselves not a favor. The teams will see that, and they will use their team of lawyers to very much screw over, for lack of a better words, or to get the, owners are going to do what they're going to do.
The most out of the player for the least amount of money.
Right. They want to have the most success by spending the least amount of money, which is, a central tenet of the capitalism system anyway. So
that's just business, dude. Like if I could buy a table for $30 or a table for $15 and they look identical and function roughly the same, I'm going to take the $15 table. Lamar Jackson, he's going at it without a lawyer. That would be like me going to Duquesne and just being like, hey, what if I just didn't pay any tuition and you guys were just cool with that? Or, how about we half my tuition, but I'll still be a full-time student, ace all my classes. They're like, no,
Right.
like, obviously not. It's kind of a weird world reversal there. But yeah, the Ravens, any team, they're all businesses, right? They're organizations that are businesses. And it's like, okay, hey, you think you deserve this much money. That's great. But we have Tyler Huntley, who does pretty much the exact same thing as you. And we can keep him for cheap. So
yeah, and organizations are, they do very much act independently. There are organizations that treat players very much like a business, while you have some franchises that will treat players with a little more. I'm going to use dignity, and I'm trying to sound non-biased, but there's definitely a bias into my own personal, what I believe every worker should have. So there's some of that, but it is important to know that different organizations act differently, and they have a different way of doing this. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of freedom in how, with how organizations handle players, which I'll get into. And a big reason, one of the reasons that I think the salary cap should, at least, like, people should understand it for a couple different reasons. The first reason is that we have to, I think it helps how we look at athletes, right? Especially NFL, because I think, any Facebook post, you're going to see that grumpy man. Why are these guys, complaining? They get paid millions to play a game. And while there's, very little, while there is some truth in that, the actual stories is much more complex and much more nuanced, which I think is just absolutely fascinating. And if there's anything you take away from this, is that NFL contracts, when you hear numbers, they're fake. They're made up, and
that's what we see. That's what we know.
Right. That is a catchy headline. That is a catchy Twitter. You see somebody signed for a 5-year, $100 million contract. And I think maybe the best example of this would probably be Patrick Mahomes, when he signed that 10-year, crazy, almost $500 million contract. We see that. We see those big numbers. We're like, oh my gosh, that's huge. But that is not actually the true essence of what that contract.
There's a lot more in the weeds that you would have to read through and be like, oh, he's going to get $500,000 or $500 million or whatever if he fulfills these 10 things or these 9 things happen. His base contract, like, that's not his base pay. His base pay over the course of 10 years is not going to be $500 million, right?
His base pay is going to be his contract minus his guaranteed extended over 10 years. Now, if he's cut during, after year 6 with the same contract, which he will most likely, the Chiefs and him will most likely reconstruct it halfway through. He's paid, very close to top 7 quarterback rather than a top 1 quarterback.
Yeah, instead of the highest paid of all time, it just sounds like a really big number.
Oh, of course, and that's what they want to do, and that is part of it. And now that we have more information, we can do that. Another reason I think the salary cap is so intriguing is this is part of NFL strategy, right? And we have instances of that, right? So for the Steelers fans out there, so Minkah Fitzpatrick's contract was really significant, and it was strategic, not only because it keeps a mainstay on the Steelers defense, but what it did was the Steelers are actually able to price out Jesse Bates, who is a safety for the Cincinnati Bengals, and because they were able to raise the market of what a safety should get, Jesse Bates will not sign with the Cincinnati Bengals.
Okay.
So there's these are actual strategies, not only to how to build your team, but how to kind of maybe restrict or drive up the price for quarterbacks. And if you want an even more, an even larger kind of instance of that, look at Deshaun Watson's contract and Lamar Jackson, right? So the Browns have who they believe is their
who they
right, who they believe is their franchise quarterback, and they were able to drive up the price of a mobile same type of quarterback, and they may price Lamar Jackson outside of the market for the Ravens. So again, these are strategic things that you'll see, within divisions that I think are incredibly interesting. Now, this is a hard cap, meaning you can't go more. You can't go more for it. If
Okay.
you do go over the hard cap.
So real quick, just
Sure.
give me some perspective. 2023, what's our cap?
So that just came out. I believe it was about 8 days ago. So it's the highest it's ever been, and that's usually the case. That only hasn't happened twice in NFL league history.
Yep.
COVID, as you mentioned, and I think
Dip.
sometime in the 1970s. I think there was a war or something happened. Anyway, it's going to be $224.8 million. So $225 million.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money, except when you start, then you start divvying it out, right? Then you're like, okay, so, if I'm the Ravens, Lamar needs this much to play again. Now, yeah, but we could be using that money to rebuild our offensive line, get our defense back,
And the cap hit it's also something worth to note, which many people don't know, is it only covers 51 player contracts, right? So your 52nd, your 53rd man, that guy that bounces off, his number does not count against or for the salary cap.
Oh, okay.
So it's against their 51 highest paid players. That is where the contracts go.
Okay.
So that is something to keep in mind. There have been a few times where there were no real salary caps, right? And that usually happens in those 10-year gaps between the collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I love this about the NFL. So this happened in 2010, right? And they were still debating, and there was no real CBA kind of in there. So there was no salary cap.
Mm-hmm.
The owners kind of got together and they said, hey, this is going to be our salary cap. We're going to agree on this. The Washington, then they were the Redskins, now they're the Commanders.
Yeah.
They ignored it, and so the NFL reduced their salary cap by $36 million over 2 seasons, right?
Oof.
So they were 18 in the hole for the next 2 seasons. Same thing with the Cowboys. It was at a much less extent. It went 10 years, $2 million, and this is, I believe it was 1980 or 19. I can't remember what year, but the Denver Broncos won a Super Bowl because they ignored the salary cap ramifications during the CBA. So they try to structure around that and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, okay. So, yeah, it's a hard cap. You're not allowed to mess with it, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm the Steelers, $224.8 million. That's our cap. Not allowed to exceed it. What happens if we do? Is it just they put us in the hole for the next couple seasons? They're like, okay, hey, you ignored us last year, so now you don't get $20 million over the next 10 seasons.
So, and that case is so unlikely because when you're an NFL, you are one of 32 billionaires, right? You don't want to give up ownership. One of 31. You don't want to give up ownership of that team.
Right.
So when you start messing with caps, when you start doing essentially taking money out of other billionaires' pockets, there are going to be ramifications, which could include losing your job. So there's a built-in incentive not to go over or fudge around with the cap space. But so the first thing is you have to cut players, right? So players will automatically be taken off your roster, and then if it becomes so erroneous, you're going to end up paying a fine. The franchise is going to have to pay a fine, and then eventually the deducting of draft picks. Now the 3 of those, which happens first or second or third, there's not really a precedent, or we don't have anything to really go off on that.
Yeah.
But and a lot of it depends on who the commissioner is and stuff like that. But those are your three. Those are your 3 takes away. You're going to have to cut players. Your players are forced. Contracts are going to be avoided. They're going to become free agents to get under the cap. You may be fined as a franchise, and you may lose draft picks.
So not what you're trying to do. If you were so desperate for players that you're already going over the salary cap, and then you lose draft picks and also having to pay out. You're just shooting yourself in the foot.
And you don't want 31 other billionaires to be mad at you.
Right. And if there's 31 people in this
incentive.
world I don't want to be mad at me, it's billionaires.
Yeah. And it's also important to note, too, you don't want to go over. You also don't want to go under. And
you got to use what you have to. Yeah, you want to use what you have, right?
90% of the cap has to be used.
Okay.
And they give you a time period on that, so 2 to 3 years, right?
Yeah.
So there have been instances, especially you see this with rebuilding teams. Jacksonville had a problem with this. Cleveland Browns had a problem with this, probably 6-7 years ago. But they just have to pay their players more or convert things into signing bonus, which we'll get into.
Yeah, I love how it's also built in of hey, you have $224 million to work with, but don't be cheap about it. Pay your people, pay your workers, and that's the NFLPA side of it. The Players Association coming in and being no, you have to pay us a certain amount. And
that's extremely, that is a valuable point right there because all teams have to spend 95% of the cap, or players are going to be paid directly, right? So they are going to get paid directly, so that salary cap is used up. So if the teams all together, where everybody was under and they weren't able to eat 95, like the NFL, the Players Association would force owners to actually write checks to players. Of course, that will never happen. They are never going to.
Could you imagine Jerry Jones walking up to Dak with his checkbook and be like, "All right, Dak, what do I owe you this week?" That would be nuts. That would be nuts. That would be insane. I don't think it would ever happen. But because, again, the teams are going to do very well at least reaching that milestone. They pretty much have a 5% wiggle room, or at least a 10% wiggle room each individual team, and then as a league they have 95%. Where I find this to be extremely stressful, if I was not one of the 31 billionaires, would be if I was an owner of the Green Bay Packers. Because if I'm the GM of the Green Bay Packers, I'm sweating because I am not a billionaire. I am a millionaire probably, but I'm only a GM. I'm not an owner. The Packers are publicly traded, right? So that's just extra pressure on the GM, who also I'm sure they have like a whole cabinet of people that run the organization, but there's no de facto owner because they're publicly traded.
They're owned by a board. Okay,
there's a board. It was so funny. About 6 years ago, I was actually looking to buy stock in the Green Bay Packers. They're closed. You can't buy anymore.
And it is all for show. You can never cash it. That's for show. I mean, it's I don't know how ethical of a thing, but I don't want to get into that.
That's another day. It would just be. I thought it'd be fun to go around saying I'm an NFL owner.
Right.
I have shares.
So how NFL contracts actually work, right? So these are, we hear, big numbers a lot of time. And I think it's also really important to remember that there's not a lot of NFL players that get paid very well, that get paid very high. We hear about the contracts, the quarterbacks or, the prime positions, top fives in their position. But when you're looking at depth, when you're looking at guys in the trenches, you're looking, I'm trying to think on the Steelers, like a Chris Wormley or,
the guy next to Cam Hayward. Not Cam Hayward, but the guy next to him who's not as popular.
A Miles Austin, who's that linebacker that had a pretty good year. But anyway, depth guys, they're not making a lot of money. Spillane, Robert Spillane, who's probably going to get a payday. So it's when you really look at a contract, the only thing, if you really want to know how big it is, you have to look at how much guaranteed money. That is really the essence of how well or how successful a player and his team was able to negotiate a contract.
Okay.
So a lot of these contracts, what they'll do is, they'll offer you, and I'm going to use like a fake number here. So I'm going to offer you, for the easy number, a 30 million, a 50 million 5-year contract with a $10 million signing bonus, right? Depending on position, that sounds like a big thing. But how these contracts are actually, they're what's called backloaded, where all of the numbers are. So the only numbers that are getting paid is that contract number, right? So if you have that 55-year, $10 million, right? That $10 million signing bonus, that is getting away. Now that $10 million signing bonus is going to be spread out throughout the 5 years of that contract, which is how you get dead money, which we'll go into. But so what you have left is that 40 million, and that will be divided between those 5 years.
Okay, so you get $8 million a year, allegedly.
Right. So when you get, let's say you get cuts in year 3, you're not going to make, that 8 plus 8 million. That is gone. That is evaporated. That was pretend money. We just said that for the language
to get you
of the
to sign
contract.
the paper. Yeah,
Absolutely.
We want you to sign here, so we're going to tell you a number. 3 years in, hey kid, ain't working out. 16 million is just gone.
Right.
Done.
Absolutely. And this is and so what's sometimes happening, so what happens sometimes is that these signing bonuses are prorated. So again, that means it's spread out through the contract. So it may not be in the organization's best interest to cut a player because that cap hit would be so high that dead money, they would actually save less money cutting the player, even though they're due $30 million, because their bonus has been prorated, and a big chunk of that is going
comes
to that.
off the salary cap, which is so. I'm just going to give like the biggest example I know everyone's heard of is the Aaron Rodgers thing. Every year it's Aaron Rodgers. Is he going to stay? Is he going to go? I hear a lot of time like, well, what's the dead money this year? What's the cap hit this year? If they cut him right now or try to trade him or something right now, void his contract in any way, what's the cap hit? And it's Aaron Rodgers, so it's big.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It takes up a lot of cap space.
So when you're trying to figure out what dead money is or how we get that number, that is when you're cut before your contract, and that includes the prorated signing bonus, which in their words, it's accelerated, right? So if I cut you, if you have 3 years left on that contract, right? That signing bonus that was spread throughout, well, that's prorated. That gets to you. All of that money accumulates, and you get that.
Yep.
But what's left of that contract,
so your signing bonus is a lump sum, we'll say.
You're getting that money.
If
that signing bonus, that guaranteed money, you're getting that. Now, how that is split up, is throughout the contract. But no matter what, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
However, the cap hits, you still have to pay the piper on that cap hit. So if I cut you and you still have 2 years and you're still getting prorated bonuses and you're still getting prorated bonuses, you are going to the organization is going to still have to pay that is still going to go up on that cap hit, and thus the dead money. You are paying money for a player that is no longer there. That's thus the name for it's the dead money, and that adds up quickly.
Big time. Well, especially because even if it's just in a regular NFL season, how many guys do we see or hear about getting cut, moved, traded? It's a constant thing. The business minds that have to go into running an NFL team are extraordinary. Like when I play Madden, dude, I just play as a player because when you start getting into the weeds of ownership or anything like that, management, I'm like, it ain't my style. It ain't my thing. That's something I hope to understand more, which we're getting to. Right. This is what we're doing. This is why we're here, right? To understand it more, researching it throughout the week. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Right. That makes sense to me.
And the Steelers are a huge proponent of that. And I'll get into that later. But remember that dead money and the proration of guaranteed salary.
Just one more question / example. So let's say you sign me to a 5-year contract for $50 million. And there's a $10 million signing bonus. You cut me after 1 year. I'm still getting that $10 million all at once right then and there.
You're going to get that.
Otherwise, it would have been spread out over 5 years. But because you're cutting me after 1 year, I only played for you for a season, and I at least walk away with $18 million because my first year is $8 million and then $10 million. Or whatever the numbers were, but
you are describing, and that is a perfect example. What you just described is a first round draft picks. It doesn't matter where, a first round draft picks contract, right? So you'll see players. So when you see a first round draft pick cut, that's a big deal. That is telling you that the organization is willing to spend to waste all this money in dead money just to get rid of you.
Yeah.
What that is almost exactly to a T how the structure of a contract if you're 5 through 17 in the first round draft. So that's an elegant point that you made right there, and an elegant example. If you will.
And what a scam! Like if I was going to the NFL and I'm like, you know what, I'm not gonna I'm not a first round draft pick. I'm a third round draft pick or whatever. I'm going to go in there and, maybe the game ain't for me anymore. Like maybe the NFL is different than I thought it was and the money just isn't worth it. I'm going to do everything in my power to get cut after 1 year because no matter what, I know I'm getting paid if my contract had guaranteed money in it.
And the significance of a third round contract and a first round contract are great. So you're not looking at nearly guaranteed money. And plus, remember the first round picks have that option at the end of the contract, which plays a role in how their salaries are decided and things like that.
Well, they also get rookie contracts though. The first round draft picks just not get rookie contracts.
No, but they're rookie first round. If you're drafted in the first round, you still get that rookie contract, which was set up in the CBA in 2010. But it is, you sign a 4-year contract. If you're a first round, you sign a 4-year contract, but teams have the option for a 5th round to pick up your
5th-year option.
Yeah, which is like a franchise, almost like a franchise tag, except nobody else can bid, and it really depletes the negotiation power of NFL quarterback, but it also empowers them as well because it works in the same salary or same as the franchise tag. And for the franchise tag, if you heard that word, what that means is it's going to pay you to put you in the top 3 position of the spot you're being franchise.
Yeah, Ben Roethlisberger had a big. I mean, there was a lot of franchise tag talk going around Ben, of just like towards his latter years, they're like, oh, they're not going to pay him. They're not going to pay him. Or no, it was Le'Veon Bell. Ben said he would take the franchise tag. It was Le'Veon Bell. They're like, we're going to franchise tag you for a running back.
Yeah,
you'll be in the top 3 of running backs paid on our team.
Right. In the NFL.
Oh, in the NFL.
Top 3. You're going to be one of the top 3 paid positions in the NFL.
But he wanted to be like the top paid.
Yeah, he wanted long-term,
and a lot more long-term commitment. There's a lot of things that go into his side of it. A lot of people were very upset. Like, Bell, how could you do this to us? I'm like, well, dude's out there putting his body on the line. You should at least show some confidence that he's going to be your guy. What I wouldn't give to have him back, but with the skill he had 10 years ago or 8 years ago or whatever. But yeah, okay, so yeah, there's a whole
and in that situation, that's up because he franchised that twice, which kind of defeats it. And there's a couple different arguments that they had about the Le'Veon Bell situation, but I think at the end of the day, when you look at it with the bird's eye view, you see that he lost money going to the Jets. Not much, but he did lose money.
I mean, but also you're in the Jets. I mean,
sure. Right.
Are you looking at success?
Right.
This year was a flash in the pan. I'd be shocked if they're decently the same team next year.
So, and a big part. So, what I want to talk about too, and what you're going to start hearing too is June 1st, right? That is an important time, and so that is when the NFL kind of restarts its its accounting calendar, right? Okay. So that is really
that's their fiscal year.
Yes, for accounting purposes.
For accounting purposes,
yes, which makes it kind of hard to track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can only do one calendar. Right, I don't need 3. I don't need a calendar, a fiscal year, and an accounting year. But okay, they can do it. These guys are smarter than us, apparently.
Yeah. So for instance, right now, like the Steelers are over the cap right now, or they're teetering it. Which, if you sound the alarms, I'll tell you why that's not a big deal.
Right.
Here on, but players cut before June 1st. Players are rarely cut before June 1st because they won't lose money. Players cut before June 1st will have the remainder of their prorated money into the previous year cap, right? So if you get cut before June 1st, all of that goes into that year's cap, right?
Okay.
But if I wait after the June 1st, I can spread that hit between last year's and this year's. And I have an actual example of this.
Okay.
Todd Gurley, right? He was cut after June 1st. So it was $11.8 million cap hit for 2020. And it was an $8.4 million for the following season in 2021. Wow. Now, if he was cut before June 1st, it would have been $20.2 million for the 2020 season, and that rolls over to the next 21 season. So it would have been a 20.220 all at once coming at you.
Yeah.
And to make it even more complicated, the NFL allows 2 what's called designated for June 1st cuts, right? So you can have a player that you're not going to cut, that you're going to cut before June 1st, so you can put those 2 tags on that player, so you can act like you're cutting them before June 1st, so you get those cap savings.
So you get rid of them, but nothing takes effect because you're saying like, oh, I was going to cut them after June 1st anyway.
Yes, absolutely. You can only do that. Every team can only do 2 times, and that works out. I kind of agree with that because not only is it used to break up dead money, but it also gives these players, a little bit of flexibility in free agency.
Right. Well, and then so
more time.
Hey, Zach, sorry, man, it's not going to work out. We're going to cut you. I'm going to tag you with this. I look. We could wait till June 2nd, but your position on another team might already be filled. You're a decent enough player. Someone's going to pick you up. So I'm going to cut you now, eat the cap hit after June 1st rates, but you still have until June 1st to really pick up on a roster somewhere.
Right.
And it doesn't shorten your time in free agency of like, oh man, now it's, June 2nd, the season starts August 3rd or whatever. And then I have 2 months. Now you gave me 4 months or something.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I can talk, and teams are, after June 1st, you're already, you're coming into, you already had the draft and stuff like that, right? So if you're getting cut after June 1st, that market for you, especially, depending on the position, really, really closes up really quickly. So it's good, it's bad. It's kind of a way to, bureaucratically circumvent the system, if you will. But it can only happen to 2 players, and and that is one of those points that the CBA tries to negotiate every year without much success. So, and another thing, you hear incentives, right? So if I think you were alluding to it earlier, where if I score 50 touchdowns or if I run for 1,400 yards, things like that. Now that salary cap, so that works against your salary cap. You have to account for it, so that goes almost like a bonus, right? So that looks like a bonus. So if I have the ability to win 5 or to achieve, some of these benchmarks and get 5 of the 10, that $10 million still has to be in the cap savings.
Okay.
Now, if you don't use it, right, if players are unable to reach it, that money gets rolled over into the next season.
Okay. So you have basically if I'm an owner, I'm looking at the salary cap, I'm breaking it up okay, we're going to put all our bonus money over here.
Right.
The rest of this is our contract money, and then you divvy it up from there.
And that's 100% how owners do that. I mean, for the draft, you have to have players to sign for your draft. So there is a portion of that salary cap that teams will move around, and depending on how many picks you have, I think the New York Giants spent a ton in their contracts. I think it was last year, but usually you want to set aside about, and depending on what team it is, anywhere. Steelers usually set around about $6 million, but anywhere from 6 to 7 to 7.5 up to $8 million aside just for rookie pools. But just like you were saying, these teams have to keep that salary cap organized in these different areas, not to go over it.
So let's take $2.8 million set aside for our bonuses. We still have $222 million to play with.
Right.
And it's really funny because it almost sounds like 224.8 doesn't sound like a very big number. And the word million at the end of it, okay, we know it means millions and millions, but I've never seen $228 million. I don't know if you have, but that's an insane amount of money. Everyone's like, oh, they have to scrimp and no, that's a ton of money. That is a ton of money. And I mean, contracts are just going to keep getting bigger to compensate for the salary cap keep going up, which is a win for everyone because that means revenue's going up. That means players are getting paid. That means, things are happening. I just wanted to put that out there real quick. $224.8 million is a lot of money. That's a lot of money where you have to tell teams you have to use this much of it. Right. And sometimes they don't. Right. That's insane. Yeah, it boggles my mind just to think about it.
Yeah, and in terms of cap restrictions, there's not really, teams really don't have an issue. Going over or going under, that is definitely an anomaly if a situation like that occurs. Where you had at Jacksonville before Blake Bortles, where they were kind of, they had a ton of draft capital, they cut a bunch of players, traded away a bunch of players, and they were below that threshold. Same with the Cleveland Browns for a while. But again, those are anomalies. Most of these teams have, very well compensated people to kind of figure and navigate that for it. So, and like I said, different teams, there is still room. It seems like it's very structured. This is how you're supposed to do, and this is what happens. This is what happens. But there is a lot of room in the NFL for teams to have an advantage, right? Mm-hmm. So the big thing that I think that's going on now in the NFL is when you have a player sign a guaranteed contract, right? Like a Kirk Cousins, I think is the most obviously just on watching now is, but Kirk Cousins was the first player to sign the all guaranteed contract, 3 years, $36 million.
Yeah.
What the owners have to do is they have to cut a check and they have to put it in escrow to make sure that money is there.
Okay.
And so when you have a less cash friendly or cash happening franchise like the Steelers, like the Bengals, like your small market teams, your ability to write a check, the organization may just not have that much money free. Mm-hmm. So there is an advantage there with, rich owners and poor owners. So, anytime these guys can find an advantage, they will.
Yeah.
So that is something to keep in mind going
Dan Snyder, again, we keep bringing him up, but that dude was cutting corners to the point where he had 2 books, remember? And that was more revenue. That was less about the salary cap and more revenue. But him lying about his revenue affected the CBA,
100%.
which affects the salary cap.
It affects this, and when you're lying about it, so you, like you said, you have 2 books, so it looks like they're making less money, and all that money is shared, so it looks like there's less revenue, which cuts down on it. Yeah, also he can enrich himself. Again, these are the ramifications for that, and Dan Snyder is going to lose his job. He's going to lose a marquee franchise, a historic franchise, because one season he wanted, or who knows how long it's been going, but he just didn't want to play by the rules of
it's been going on a while. Their stadium's in shambles, and the team can't even figure out a name, and they're just all over the place. They're a mess. I hope whoever ends up taking over ownership is gonna do better. Not what I was trying to get at. What I was just trying to say is like him just doing that, even if it was just for the 1 year, potentially affected the CBA.
Sure,
which definitely affects
most definitely.
which definitely affects the salary cap, which is how you get 30 billionaires pissed off at you.
Right. Yeah, and you're taking money out of your workers' pocket when you don't need to.
Right.
Which is, and they're the ones that generate the revenue for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the Steelers this season, I believe they're rolling over 4 points. Yeah, they're going to roll over about $4.5 million.
Okay.
Which is a number you don't want to see high, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think, when you look at it, you think, oh wow, yeah, the more money we can roll over, the more money we'll have next year. But there's some drawbacks to that, right? So that means incentives weren't paid out, right? Yeah. That means you can roll over money because the cap wasn't managed to the full capability, because you do need to spend money. Yeah. And also these performance bonuses aren't being paid out, which makes it less likely that free agents want to sign with you.
Right.
So
they're not being paid out. And it could be either like, hey, we just didn't pay it on time or whatever, or it could be like your players just aren't hitting those goals like as much as we want them to, right?
Sure, and it's going to happen. Yeah, you're going to have rollover most seasons. But you don't, if you want to. That number's not talked about a lot because it's usually not very high, and you don't want it to be high. As a fan, you don't want it to be too terribly high. You want to keep it in that 5-6 million. Mm-hmm. The highest I think the Steelers ever had in rollover money was because of Le'Veon Bell. They had franchise tagged him for like $12.5 million that season. He didn't play, so they were able to roll over, the 12.5 plus that extra money. So they rolled over about $20 million in the next season.
Yeah, which that's a lot.
Which is too much. And, you $16 million that you could have used at another position, depth or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how you're gonna stay.
That's an O line. That's a D line. That's a really good linebacker safety combo. That's new corners. That's another running back. You can give another guy.
Before I go into the position that the Steelers are in cap-wise coming into the next season, I do want to talk about what makes the Steelers a little bit, and I alluded to this earlier in the show. The Steelers' ability to kind of put veteran players first on that. And so the Steelers, they love to restructure contracts, right? We see it all the time, right? Yes. So what they'll do is they convert contracts into cash, right? So, if and again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, and they won't do reconstruction until training camp and things like that. And this is one of the many things that keep the Steelers kind of a unique organization. One of the reasons I love to follow them. So what they'll do is, let's look at, who can I look at? We'll look at TJ Watt, right? Okay. So he's got, and I don't know his contract on the top of my head, but let's say he's got 4 years, $80 million left, right? So this year he's due, let's say $10 million. He is going to be $10 million. So what they're going to do is they're going to convert his cap hit his cap hit to cash, which thus takes what his cap hit's going to be, right? So that money, you're going to get $10 million, whether it's throughout 16 weeks or 18 weeks, or right now. I'm going to give it to you right now in cash. And players like that.
Yeah, who doesn't love a lump sum of $10 million?
Right,
and that's a house.
Right, and so what that does is it takes that $10 million and it spreads it over the rest of his contract, the rest 3-4 years. Yeah. So you're creating that dead money because you're eventually going to have to pay the piper. But if you have a player that's going to be there for a long time, that doesn't matter. The chances of that dead money is either going to be very none or very minimum. So that's why only certain players, the franchise keystone, and the Steelers love to do that because what it does is it kind of pushes you to get paid. A lot of these contracts, and the Steelers do the same thing, are backloaded, but what it's doing is it's putting a guarantee on that backloaded contract.
Right.
So, and this does bite them in the butt. I don't know if you remember Lamar Woodley had a phenomenal, first contract, got that second contract, they reconstructed it, and they ended up having to take I think a $17.5 million cap hit to move him because he had failed that position. He just wasn't worth that amount of money anymore. But they had reconstruction. So it does, if you don't know your people, if you don't know your veterans, or heaven forbid a guy gets hurt.
Yeah.
You could
happens a lot.
That guaranteed money. Now, if you're hurt and you're halfway through your contract, all that money is voided. Yeah. Right. So other than your guarantees, but your performance bonuses are gone, obviously. And then what else was, designated to you is also gone. So it's
sorry, kid, not playing, can't do it.
And it's a rough bit. It's a business, but I do appreciate the Steelers' ability to restructure contracts and push dead money, but they're betting on their older players, right? Yeah. And you're going to see that the NFL, the Steelers are going to hold on to players a year longer than what they should. They are not the Patriots in that way. Cameron Hayward is going to have a bad season, right? He's going to have that final line, unless he hangs it up in his prime, which these NFL players don't like to do that. That's Ben's situation was a little different, but we saw that with it. Troy Polamalu is the best example.
Yeah,
right.
He was a guy. Jerome Bettis went out on top. He won the Super Bowl and retired.
Yes,
it was the last stop Detroit.
Troy Polamalu was the guy we kept reconstruction his.
I see.
Switching his contract, and in the last 2-3 years, he just wasn't that guy. But we owed him so much money, we couldn't cut him. Yeah. And half a step Troy Polamalu is still better than your average safety. But when you're paying him that high, when you're dedicating that much money to him, you would kind of want a higher performance, and it just didn't happen with Troy Polamalu because Father Time is undefeated. So
undefeated. So real quick, you use TJ Watt as an example, and your numbers are just what were used to make sense. I just wanted to read off what TJ Watt's current contract situation is for context. He signed a 4-year deal for $112,011,000. Pittsburgh Steelers, including a $35,593,470 signing bonus, $80 million guaranteed, and an average annual salary of $28,002,750. In 2023, he will earn a base salary of $20 million. While carrying a cap hit of $29,368,694 and a dead cap value of $48,106,082.
Yep. And so what you're going to see this season is you're going to hear TJ Watt came into the front office and reconstructed his contract. So they're going to give him a big, large sum, so they can spread the cap hit over the rest of his contract, and increasing that dead money if he were to get cut.
Yeah. Or get injured or something, right? Because if there's one thing we know about the Watts, they get injured a lot. Yeah. Thankfully it's never been too serious, but it does happen to a lot of these guys. Sure. At least TJ and JJ, Derek seems to be pretty sturdy.
Now, when a player retires in these certain situations, it is technically that money should go back to the NFL. It should go back to the owners. A lot of teams don't do that. There are teams that do that.
That was going to be my next kind of question. Was when you brought up retirement, I thought of this question. It's how pissed off were the Patriots when Gronk just up and retired, but then comes back and then retires again? I don't know. I don't know how they structured that. Does it go back? Did the Patriots take their money back, or they were like, crap? Yeah,
that was part of the negotiations with Tampa Bay. You can take him. You have to give us 4th round, but you have to get this cap hit off our books. You have to take this contract. That is part of the deal. And the Browns they did this 5-6 seasons ago, and it was really, really smart. It's when they got that I forget the guy's name. But they had an analytics guy as the GM, and what they traded for Case Keenum, who was a huge cap hit for the Houston Texans.
Okay.
So they said, okay, this guy he's big on your books. How about this? We give you a 5th round. You give us a 2nd round plus the player plus all that dead cap, so we can eat up some of our space. He's not on your books.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that. That doesn't happen a lot because if you are going to be competitive, you have to use your cap space. You have to maximize that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of teams, the margins of difference between what is available and what's not is rather small and things like that. So, but those kinds of cool things can happen, but you just don't see them a lot with the NFL because it is such a, that hard cap makes it hard for you to deviate the formula that's propagated in there.
This is another question. It's okay if you don't know the answer to this, but what about, so Deshaun Watson's case is a little particular.
He's an anomaly. He's an anomaly.
Because he was suspended for 20 games, right? Or he was suspended for however many it was. But okay, so I'm a player, I don't want to get too morbid about it, but let's just say I'm a guy whose first name is Henry and last name Ruggs, and I do something awful off the field, void my contract, get arrested, I'm in jail, whatever the scenario is. Again, I'm not trying to bring it down. What happens? Is this team still penalized for all that dead cap money because I voided my contract as a player?
That's a great question. So there is language in these contracts, and again, these are very thick.
Yeah, these are books. Yeah.
So that that if you violate certain areas, ethic areas, your contract is null and void.
Okay.
Now, however, if that player is on the roster, depending on when this happens and he's off that roster, that money's still there, right? So so if he was owed and was paid out, a $15 million signing bonus, and that player is gone, you still take that $15 million hit on that. So
but it comes down to the details of the contract of ethically, let's say, you get arrested for anything, right? You could get arrested for jaywalking, but the second you get handcuffs slapped on you, your contract's null and void per the language of your contract. And your agent should read that and let you know, hey, if there's one thing you can't do the whole time you're here is get arrested for anything. Not to try and drag it down, but I always was curious of man, these teams are eating all this dead money for guys going out in town being stupid with their money or being just dumb. There's got to be something in there for that.
I think the most the example that sticks out to my mind is Aaron Hernandez, right? I think he had signed a contract the year before. He was the highest paid tight end. People forget how talented Aaron Hernandez was. He was a Gronk, but probably a little bit faster, a little bit
more nimble than Gronk.
Actually, I definitely think a better route runner. And then he goes to jail, murders those people, and his contract's obviously voided and stuff like that. But the Patriots were paying for 2 or 3 years for a guy that wasn't on their roster. So
now in that specific case, I would also think so he's in jail for murder. He's not making any money. That money's going to his family or whoever. So in that case, it's kind of it's kind of glad that his contract wasn't worked out because those people who had nothing to do with it, right? As long as he's not making the money, who really cares? Right. It's in his family, and we all know how the Aaron Hernandez situation ended. So ultimately, his family ended up getting that money from the Patriots plus whatever.
Yeah, and some of that, and because of the language of the contract, he was given some of that money. Because that's the legal contract.
Yeah.
So before I leave you here, I do want to go over the Steelers situation. What we can look forward to that in there. So right now. Like I mentioned before, they're rolling over about $4.5 million. Right now, they're about $5 to $6.5 million over the cap, which again, that doesn't matter until June 1st. Right? Okay. That is really not that important until June 1st. They're going to be an estimated, after they sign rookies or after that amount, and usually it's about $5 to $8 million set aside by the Steelers. They're going to be about $13 to $17 million in cap spending. Now, it's hard to gauge, right? Because the NFL doesn't have to tell you this information. So you can kind of just look, you can kind of just guess what's on there. So it's between $13 and $17 million, which will put them rank about 15th in available cap space, which isn't unusual for the Steelers and stuff like that. And what I keep hearing is Well, they have a rookie quarterback. Shouldn't these contracts be, shouldn't we figure out this contract? That's true. We do also have the number one defense and the highest paid defense in the NFL.
Yeah. Put a lot of money in our defense with no quarterback.
And the Steelers aren't a big free agency splash. They're, and look at the. I'm sure we've all seen it. I've seen it 100 times now. Philadelphia is in the Super Bowl. They built their roster through the draft, and that's how the NFL. That's how the Steelers are most comfortable doing it. They like cultivating a culture. Yes. So if you're looking for like a big splash free agency, probably not going to happen this year.
Steelers are a very cultured place. When we bring people to Pittsburgh, or when they bring people to Pittsburgh, they want them to be a part of the city. Like Ben Roethlisberger is part of the city. T.J. Watt's a part of the city. Minka Fitzpatrick, we got him from a trade from the Dolphins. He's part of the city. These guys are our community. So yeah. We're not just going to go out and pick up a running back because he's unhappy in Los Angeles and be like, oh, don't worry, you're talented. Come hang out with us. Dude's going to be gone in a year. Nobody cares about him, right? Like, at least not in Pittsburgh. It works for some teams. It doesn't work in this city. It's not the city style.
So some players that will probably be cut. I mean, these aren't free agencies whose contracts are going to be, who are expired, like a Devin Bush, who's, they're just going to choose not to resign him, so he's, he doesn't matter. But some cap casualties, as they call it,
he matters to someone, just not us.
In terms of money, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I'm just giving you a hard time.
Mitch Trubisky is probably going to be a guy that's on the chopping block.
Yep.
William Jackson. So when I tell you that they're $5 or $6 million over the cap, oh my gosh, how can that be? William Jackson's, $17 million. Designated June 1st cut. That's $17 million right off the books, right off there. Cutting for a guy that never, probably played 16 snaps. And then Chuck Fora, Chunks, as he's, affectionately known as, he is probably going to be, I know he's a fan favorite, but he is probably going to be a cap casualty. And then Miles Jack is also a name that's going to, the depth of position at linebacker makes it seem impossible, but if the Steelers want to free up a large amount of money,
get a big linebacker in the draft.
Yeah, or something like that. Miles Jack, and that'll be telling to see what the Steelers do in the draft, or what their plans are. So those are just a couple names that I think Miles Jack will stay on the roster. They've said good things about him.
They like him. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him, because you hear of him, but he's like clearly not an every down guy. Right? Yeah. He's in and out. I don't think most linebackers are anymore. Now I'm thinking about it, but even still.
So yeah, that was my quick recap or quick explaining of how the draft works. It's a fascinating. I love it. It's one of my favorite things about the NFL. I'm a journalist major, but I'm also a history major, and I'm a Latin American. Economics is my concentration. So when you have the ability to really look at a living economic model, there's so many lessons we can learn and so many things that play out. I mean, it truly is fascinating.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. And again, as a fan who is, the salary cap's this big, dark, looming shadow over the season of like, don't go over the cap. And it's very scary. And if you're on the radio, you can't see, but I'm doing like the big menacing hands. It's like, okay, so we don't go over the salary cap. Easy, right? Should be. But there's so many, like you were saying, economic hurdles and hoops that you have to jump through, teams of lawyers paging through like encyclopedia worth of contracts. And, if you're an agent, you have more than one player, like God love you, because your entire life is spent reading their contract and just being like, looking for any little loophole or something. I'm sure they have some quicker way to do it, but if it were me, I'd be losing my mind. Right? Yeah. There's so many mental and economic gymnastics you have to do to get the salary cap even to where it is, and then to be on the team. Like, we said it was the owner's responsibility. They're the funders. Like, they have a team of accountants and lawyers and money men that spend it.
Oh, 100%.
And GMs and head coaches like, hey, we like this guy. What can we do for him? Well, we can't do much. All right, I guess I don't like him that much.
Right.
So yeah, it's a wild world of the business side of a sports industry that a lot of people just look at and go, well, these guys are making tens of millions of dollars a game. Like, it's not 100% true.
Right. And it's also important to note, and I like to say this a lot, when you commit to the NFL, you're committing to losing years of your life. The average lifespan of a player in the NFL is 55 years of age.
Yeah.
Right. So you're cutting 20 years off your life. hopefully they're compensated quickly enough and largely enough to give their sacrifice for our entertainment.
Yeah. Now I will say it does seem like that trend is going upwards though, because safety is getting better.
Sure, absolutely, and how players are taking care of their body.
Yeah,
and things like
science
that.
is getting better. I mean,
of course,
it's all kinds of and that's something we might go talk about too. Is when I was home, I had my family was telling me about a show they watched where Steve Smith Sr., the wide receiver from Carolina,
mm-hmm.
He was like, it was a show called The Weirdest Jobs in the NFL. He literally just went around and see what people were doing and stuff and he got a good look at the Buffalo Bills facility and their training facility and their recovery facility. And you got the in-depth look at it. That would be something fun I'd love to talk about too. That would just be amazing. You go out there, you play a hard NFL football game. What do you do for the next 12 hours, right? Are you in the ice tub or do you just go home and relax? Like me, I just go home and relax. But those guys, they spend hours here, hours there, talk to a doctor, drink a smoothie that's specially prepared for their body, no matter what.
Right.
It's insane.
You see that with a lot of college football programs too, because they have so much money they have to spend it.
Yeah.
So their facilities are state of the art and then some.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that would be something fun to talk about. If not next week, another time.
Yeah.
We'll decide on what to do next week. I'm either thinking that officiating, or we can start branching off and finding something else. So
yeah, absolutely.
So all right, are you good?
I'm good as long as you are.
Thank you so much for your explanation today, Zach. You are very smart when it comes to economics, and we appreciate you. Everyone else, thank you so much for listening in. I hope you all learned something, and we'll see you next Wednesday back in the chair.
Go Kansas City.
Woo, Philly. Okay. We good on there?
I believe so.